At the Global Investigative Journalism Conference, we asked some of the world's leading experts for their top tips when investigating stories.
Again, it varies from funder to funder, but the sort of rule of thumb.
Funding can make the difference between a good story and a great one, or even whether a story gets told at all. So funding your project or your organisation is essential.
Hi, I'm Bridget Gallagher of Gallagher Group LLC, a consulting firm specializing in work with nonprofit journalism and media organizations. Over the last 7 years, I've worked with organizations ranging from content producers to media development groups to journalism trainers and journalism schools, and I've helped them raise tens of millions of dollars to support their missions by adhering to a few simple habits. The first fundamental of a good fundraising program is preparation. And this should be easy for you as a journalist. What we mean by preparation is just taking the time to get to know your donor, understanding what that foundation or individual philanthropist is really interested in and wants to achieve when they give their charitable dollars. As a journalist, you can use those research and fact-finding skills to figure that out. So as a first step in any solicitation, you want to think about looking at your Foundation Center database, your European Foundation Center, a publication like the Chronicle of Philanthropy, even looking at news clips for biographical information or announcements of new grants programs can help you understand who's a likely prospect for your gift and why. And you want to take time to think about your mission as an organization and why it's relevant to that particular donor. Think about what pieces of your work or your mission you need to emphasize to be compelling to that particular prospect. The second habit of a successful fundraising program is presentation. And this is a bit trickier and important because this is where the rubber really meets the road in terms of your ability to interest a prospective donor in your mission, your organization, your work. And sometimes you only get one bite at the apple, so it's really important that you're as prepared as possible and put your best foot forward. But essentially, you want to be able to articulate your case for support, what you do and why it's important, in ways that your particular prospect is going to find compelling. In the best of all possible worlds, the presentation takes place as an in-person meeting. You're sitting in front of that person, you can read his or her body language, you can ask a lot of questions, do a lot of active listening, and use that to tailor your own message about why they might be interested in a partnership with you and how they might benefit from that. But it's not always the case that we can get those in-person prospecting meetings. Sometimes you're on a phone call or a lousy Skype connection. Sometimes you're relying on a short presentation deck or a two-pager to make your case. So it has to be really thoughtful and succinct. And the three basic points you want to answer in whatever format your presentation takes place is why you, why now, why this? Why are you the best organization that's poised to address this problem or this challenge that you've described? What's your approach? What are you going to do to solve that problem? And what's the urgency around it? Why now? Why is this something that a donor should devote his or her hard-earned philanthropic dollars or a portion of her annual grant-making budget to solving? So those are the things that you have to factor into your case for support and make sure that you really put front and center as you are introducing yourself and presenting your mission in your organization. The third key habit of a good fundraising program is persistence. And this is the most important one, but it's also the trickiest because you're probably juggling a lot of other responsibilities in running your organization and running your fundraising program. But this is important because it really does have to be a habit. Persistence and maintaining your donor relationships, building those donor relationships, is something that you have to spend some portion of every day doing. And fundamentally, it really just comes down to good manners, being thoughtful, being tactful. Following up on whatever you said in your presentation meeting you would do for the donor in terms of sending more information, sending a concept note, sending a list of your board members. Do what you said you'd do your best to kind of give good donor customer service, and make sure that you stay in touch with that prospective donor. Grant makers' budgets are usually limited, and sometimes, though they might like you and your work, it takes 6 months or even a year or more before they can make room for your organization in their budget. So you need to stay on top of them and remind them of all the things that you told them in the presentation stage, who you are, what you're doing, why it matters, and why you can help them. And you need to remind them that you're still here, still seeking funding, so that they stay attuned to what your organization is doing and have the information they need to make the case for a grant or a gift to your organization. Don't get discouraged if you don't hear back from them a lot. Most of the foundations or philanthropists that you would appeal to are busy people. They probably hear from a lot of people like you. That's actually why you need to stay engaged, and why I think it's a good rule of thumb to reach out every 5 or 6 weeks with maybe a quick phone call or a quick email, something newsworthy that's happened in your organization, and an example of impact that your organization has achieved, just to keep them engaged, keep in touch with them, and make sure they don't forget about you. The other reason why it's important and helpful to be persistent is that people actually really hate saying no. Even though as a grant maker, rejection is part of your job, people fundamentally dislike sending people away, and sometimes you can actually convert what might otherwise be a no into a yes just by virtue of staying in touch. So be polite, be friendly, be tactful, but stay on top of them and make them give you a no. Be that persistent, and hopefully you'll have a good result. The most important of these 3 habits is persistence. Not only because it takes real time and effort to commit to, but because at the end of the day, the most significant catalytic investments to your organization are going to come from people and organizations that know and trust you. And building that kind of relationship, building that kind of trust takes time. There's no hack, there's no shortcut, there's no substitute for putting the time in to help a prospective donor get to know you and make sure that they have the information they need to understand why a philanthropic partnership with you makes sense. It's persistence that's going to get you the gift at the end of the day. So as an example of why persistence is important, I had identified a foundation that I thought would be an excellent client for one of my prospects on the basis of some work I had done with that foundation in the past. I knew what they were interested in, I knew that they had a very global approach, and I thought that the work that my client was doing would be very interesting to them. And I happened to know that my client was going to be in Switzerland, where this foundation was based, about 3 months in advance. They were planning on going to a conference later in the year. So I started reaching out right at the moment I found out about it to make sure that we would be able to get in front of them while I had this kind of serendipitous moment of my client being in the same place as the foundation I wanted to match them up with. So I emailed them a kind of brief organizational overview and a little bit about the founder and executive director's background and radio silence. I continued emailing them every 3 weeks and then every 2 weeks. And then just as my client was about to leave for the trip to Switzerland, the program officer I had been in touch with finally got back to me, apologizing for being so slow to respond and saying that they would be thrilled to meet while we were in town. And it was a tremendously productive meeting. They invited a general support proposal and actually are now one of my client's largest general support donors. So there was nothing particularly clever or cute about this interaction. I had just done the homework of knowing that my client's issues and this foundation's issues were very much aligned, their approaches were very much aligned, and I just stayed on top of them until they gave me the answer that I wanted, which ultimately helped us get a multi-year operating grant that changed the organization in some pretty fundamental ways.